Welcome again to Crosspoint. My name is Cale Courtright, the preaching minister here, and we are so glad you're here to worship with us today. If you have your Bible, turn over to Genesis 41, and we'll be there in just a minute as we continue our series on the life of Joseph. Before we get into that, though, I do want to issue one more message of gratitude. Thank you to everyone who helped make VBS happen. I mean, so many people between the setup, 2 weeks ago, being here every night, group leaders and helping with games and snacks and all the things, and even a crew that came and helped just tear down. I mean, it was a wonderful VBS, and it couldn't have happened without you. And I want to say thank you again, and thank you for all those who were praying for the spiritual impact of that. And we'll see maybe in a few years or decades, but we are confident that God did something through our VBS last week. So thank you for being here and helping with that. We've been going through the life of Joseph, which, there's a lot of things for us to take for our own lives in it. Last week we kind of covered 2 stories quickly, but really it's just the first part of the story that will continue and finish this part of his story today. But last week he's in Potiphar's house, and then Potiphar's wife tries to coerce him into bed with her, and he runs from her only to end up in prison, where things are going pretty good. He interprets a couple dreams, only they forget him. And so that's where we leave Joseph. His story, I call it a roller coaster, but it's kind of a mostly down roller coaster, His story starts pretty good, and it only seems, as soon as it gets a little better, it seems to go worse. Now, here's what I want you to kind of keep in your mind as we dive into it this morning. This question: who are you when things don't work out? Who are you when things don't work out? Because as we see in Joseph, we see a lot of integrity, even when things aren't going so well. It's really easy to be a disciple of Christ, to follow him faithfully when things are going well. When everything about your plans seem to work out, it's really easy. What about when they don't work out? What then? Who will you be in that moment? So we've seen Joseph go through that and somehow maintain his integrity. And we're going to see a little bit more about that story today. This story is the power of the dream. We left you in chapter 40. It says he was forgotten. And probably the original audience might have been wondering something like this: will Joseph's dream die in the dungeon? Will Joseph's dream die in the dungeon? And chapter 41 answers that question. It's told in 3 parts. If you were filming this, you would give it a prologue, a middle, and an epilogue. We're going to tell that story, though I'm going to give it to you out of order just to make a point today. So let's start here with the prologue, verse 1. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, when out of the river there came 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. The cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again, and he had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. 2 years later, this happens. 2 years. I think when you're reading in the Bible, occasionally it can be really easy just to kind of skip over little moments like that. Well, it all happened so long ago. So much has happened. 2 years. Who cares? Let's move on. 2 years. I saw a picture this week. Now, my kids are right in the ripe age. I saw a picture of them from 2 years ago. They look like different people, right? 2 years. 2024, it happened, yesterday? It's just 2 years. No big deal. COVID was last week, 6 years ago, No big deal. On the other hand, 730 nights Joseph goes to bed in a dungeon. 730 nights he knows he's wrongfully imprisoned. He's done nothing wrong. 730 nights, I imagine he's praying as he tries to fall asleep. God, free me from this dungeon. What night would you give up praying that prayer? What night would you think that God had forgotten you or wonder if there was a God at all? 730 nights he goes to bed. He's forgotten. He's about to be remembered. Imagine how you would feel. Now, here in the prologue, we see that the story has been recentered on Pharaoh. Again, I've told you this before, but Pharaoh is not named. It'd be really nice to date the story if he had been named, but he's not. And it's the Israelites retelling, it's their subversive way of retelling the story, because the story is not about Pharaoh. He might be the world's main actor, but he's not the main actor in this story, so he doesn't get a name. Pharaoh is being acted upon. He's not doing the acting. For all the grammar nerds out here, he's the object, not the subject, okay? Which is abnormal for him, because kings normally are in the seat of power and they make things happen. Things don't happen to them. And because of that, you can imagine that he doesn't get a lot of bad news. One time I remember growing up, 2 younger brothers, we broke something. Couldn't tell you what, lots of things broke, okay? And so something broke, and we went, okay, rock, paper, scissors, who gets to go tell mom or dad? I don't want to go tell them. I told them last time. Let's draw straws. I'm the oldest, so I'm not telling them. Look, I will physically force you to go tell them, This kind of moment. Because you don't want to go deliver bad news, especially to someone who might have authority over you. Pharaoh probably didn't get a lot of bad news. He issued directives. Things did not come back to him. It'd be the kind of thing, go fix this. I don't want to hear about the problems. Okay, well, in this case, he hears about a problem, but it doesn't come from a person, it comes from above. That the dreams, that God's message to him is somehow bypassing everything else and is invading his dream. The empire is falling. That's what the dream means. His power, the things that have helped him become this kind of person, there is no more power here. One thing that we need to not miss in this story is where this story starts. The cows come up out of the Nile River. The Nile is the seat of power for Egypt. Why is Egypt a successful empire? Because they have the Nile River. It allows transportation, but more than that, it allows them to irrigate their what's the word? Produce is the word coming to my mind. Crops, thank you. I grew up in Oklahoma City, I don't know. But it allows them to, when the desert around them is going through a famine pretty much all the time, they're not. Only now that the message that is seeming to come to Pharaoh is that this power that you hold, the Nile River, it cannot save you. The Nile River brings life, but only now it's bringing death. Those gaunt cows, they're coming out of the Nile. The thin reed, it's coming out of the Nile. The Nile will not save you. This is as bad as it gets for Egypt. This is where their power resides. And God is saying there will be no power here. Which, by the way, is why in Exodus, one of the plagues will be the Nile River, taking that power from them. The Nile should bring life, instead it's going to bring death. Well, what can they do? What should they do? Let's see how it turns out here. Verse 46, the end of the story. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and he traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt, and he stored it in the cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain like the sand of the sea. It was so much he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end. That was 53. And the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was a famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all of Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried out to Pharaoh for food. And Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. He'll tell you what to do." When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptian, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. We fast forward to the end of this. Joseph correctly interprets the dream. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. And everything has changed. All you have to do is read a few verses. And the little boy who woke up in the dungeon is now leading Egypt. Egypt is thriving. His leadership is good. He can be ruthless at times, but he has made it to where Egypt can thrive, if not more than survive. At the beginning of the story, Pharaoh is a little bit pathetic. If you read it, you can't help but understand that that's how the Jewish writer wrote the story. Pharaoh comes across as someone who is pathetic and weak, and he doesn't have any answers. Joseph, on the other hand, is his complete opposite. He has know-how and confidence. He's been given power, and we know where it comes from. Pharaoh seems to give this power, but we know where his true power resides. And not only that, he has full power. Later, I'd ask you to do something. Go back and read Genesis 41, 46 through 57 again. And maybe read it out loud and pay attention to the word all. It shows up something like 8 to 10 times. You cannot mistake how complete Joseph's power is. It's all power here. Well, what has happened? What happened between the beginning of the story, 2 years in the dungeon, now he has power. Not only is he in charge, he has freedom to roam about the country as he sees fit. He's on Pharaoh's chariot. Something significant has happened. Joseph, God's dreamer, is now the one who brings life. Our God has worked through him. How do we get there? Well, what I want to do is I want to tell you the story. We'll go back to 3 key verses that happen here in the middle. So what happens, Pharaoh wakes up from this dream, and he calls all of his experts to him. And he's asking them, what does my dream mean? No one knows, but over there in the corner you have a cupbearer who goes, oh, wait a minute. I know somebody who can interpret this dream. They call Joseph up out of the dungeon, and the first thing Joseph says is, I can't do it. I can't do it. But God can. God can interpret this dream. And so they go on. Not only does Joseph interpret the dream, but he gives them a plan of how to execute the dream. And then Pharaoh looks around and goes, well, who can do this? Who can become our person? Well, Joseph, you're right here. Why don't you be that guy? And so Joseph, who wakes up in the dungeon, is now second in command in a heartbeat. And there are 3 key verses of how this happens. The question for us this morning is, how does he become this kind of person? We talked about who he is when things don't work out. But how does he go from pit to palace without losing his mind, his integrity, or his faith? Because somehow he does all 3. There are 3 key verses in this section I think tell us. The first is this, that we have to learn to point to our God. Genesis 41, verse 16. I can't do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Okay, before we go on, I want you to really picture this story for a moment. Pharaoh wakes up and he is afflicted. He knows this is not a dream just like any other, that this means something. So he calls his experts to him, the people who have helped him arrive at where he is, the people he leans on to maintain his power and authority in the world. There is no one that is his equal in the world. There is no other empire at this time. It's just Pharaoh. And in the moment, they can't do it. So like I said, the cupbearer says, wait, there is one, and he's in your dungeon. So imagine, this is the royal court. Imagine how they're dressed, what they look like. And now they pull a guy out who's been in the dungeon at least 2 years, but longer than that. Imagine how he was dressed and compared to those around him. So the cupbearer, imagine who he is. He's standing over there. He said, can you interpret our dream? The first thing Joseph says is, I can't. And the cupbearer is like, wait a minute. Because see, he had a dream once. He was in prison. And the other guy with the dream, the baker, he's not there anymore. He died because of his dream. Wait a minute. He says, I can't do it, but God can. God can do it. So Joseph knows where his power comes from. Everything in him should be screaming, Joseph, sell yourself. This is your moment. Prove your worth. Take your credit. What would I do? What would you do? I would treat it like a job interview, right? You're in there. You finally are out of prison. And they answer this question. And I think it's kind of our equivalent to when you're asked, give us your 3 weaknesses. And you're doing the math, go, how do I say something positive that answers their question, right? I work too hard, I care too much, that kind of thing, right? But Joseph doesn't do that. Joseph just answers the question, I can't do it. It's not from me. I don't have the know-how, I don't have the skills, but I know the one who does. He points to God. There is one who can do this. He gives God all of the credit, which this is stunning to me, that he points away from himself, that he doesn't use this as an opportunity to find his escape, to find his salvation, but rather he answers truthfully. It is God, not this royal power or imperial planning, who will bring the future. It's God who brings life and death. The dream probably seems like nonsense to Pharaoh. After all, he has power. But rather, this Hebrew slave says, no, I'll tell you the one who can do it, the one who will bring the future. And so, what does this mean for us? When your moment comes, who gets the credit? See, I think oftentimes, when things go well, we easily find the reasons why they should have gone well. You know, I know how hard I worked. I know what I sacrificed. I know what I earned. It was through my power, through my abilities. Now, the converse is also true. When things don't go well, I can tell you whose fault it is. Because it's not mine. Because I worked hard. Because I sacrificed. Because I earned it. It should have worked out. We have an easy way of taking all of the credit, but throwing off all the blame to God. Who are you when things don't work out? Will you continue to be a faithful person with integrity? Joseph here, he knows that it is not because of his power and ability that he can do this. He's not the dreamer because he went to dream school, but because God works through him. It's really easy to take all the credit and to issue all the blame back to God. Now, God is not looking for us to have some type of false modesty or some kind of veiled humility. Joseph is still bold, he's still confident, only he knows where his abilities reside. He knows who actually gets the credit. It's his God. So when people look at you, what do they see? Do they see someone who takes all of the credit for themselves, but when it gets a little bit difficult, they throw that onto somebody else? Joseph's story reminds us to point to God, as he's the one who gives us everything we have. The second thing that we see in this story is to prepare faithfully. Verse 38, we zoom down to that. Joseph, he not only interprets the dream, he gives them a plan. And after he gives the plan, verse 38, Pharaoh asks them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Again, don't zoom past this moment. They're in the royal court. Joseph does, again, what I would not do. He answers the dream, only then he goes on and says, and here's what you should do. Maybe at that moment he goes, what do I got to lose? Going back to the dungeon? Maybe they kill me? I mean, what else, what do I have to lose? So he issues a plan. You and I, we might answer the question and kind of try to fade into the background. But he says, here's what you should do. Well, he gives the plan that you should, for 7 years, you should store up. So when the 7 years of famine come, we're prepared, that you are prepared. He gives the plan. Pharaoh looks around and goes, aren't you the experts? Why couldn't you tell me this? He says, who can do this? Who can be this person? But beyond that, he says something more than that. Who is like this man who has the Spirit of God? Pharaoh is not faithful to Israel's God. And yet he's seeing something in this moment that is causing him to testify. Who can be like this man and has the Spirit of God? God has purposes and dreams, but it doesn't mean that we don't play a role. Often it means that we bring bold action. God's purpose is not the end of human planning, but often the ground for it. Here's what I mean. Some of us might be prone to think, well, if God's in control, then why should I plan anything? If God's in control, why should I prepare? I should just let go and let God. And tomorrow you can go to Mardell and buy that poster. But today, here's why you shouldn't. Because what we're not asking for is laziness, but faithfulness. We are often called to be the hands and feet of God, to boldly and faithfully put to plan the dreams that God has given us. God gave the dream and Joseph issues the plan. Both matter. We're called to be both, to plan and plan carefully, but ultimately to understand whose plan it is. It's God's. God is in control. Plans might change. If you think about Joseph's life, if you think about his story, everything has prepared him for this moment. In the pit, in Potiphar's house, in the prison, all of this. And what this means for us is that whatever role you're in now, be faithful in it. Be faithful right where you are. Even if it feels small, even if you feel forgotten, you don't know what God is preparing you for. Joseph could have done a number of things. He gets sold into Potiphar's house, and he could have said, you know what? I'm going to do what's minimum required of me. Keep my head down, try to keep my head and my job, because this is pretty cush. I could have been sold anywhere, but I'm in the captain of the guard's house. Joseph instead is so faithful in it, he's running the entire house. He ends up in the dungeon. And at that point, I don't know how you would feel. Would you just try to make it through, plan a prison break, hope that your life ends? Instead, Joseph is faithful in the moment, and he's running the prison. He's prepared for this moment. He may not think it's fair where he is, but he asks himself the question, how do I be faithful here? Oftentimes, especially when things aren't working out, I'm tempted to think, God, when will you fix this? God, when will things turn good for me again? When will it finally start to work out? The question we probably should ask instead is, what does it look like to be faithful right here and right now? With wherever God has put us. How can you be faithful in that moment, in that place? Regardless of whether or not it was right that you ended up there. Lastly, we see in this story that God specializes in comebacks. Our God loves the underdog, the second chance story. Verse 41, we read this. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in his chariot, a second in command, and people shouted before him, make way. It's a royal declaration. He put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all of Egypt. It's quite the reversal. Joseph wakes up in the dungeon and he's going to go to bed in the palace. He wakes up as a mere slave, a prisoner, and now he's second in command. Pit to palace in a day. Our God specializes in comeback stories and second chances and the underdog. But don't miss the clothing here. It's key to Joseph's story. Pharaoh gives him his signet ring, says, you speak for me. He dresses him in royalty. This is the same boy who was given a coat of many colors, who his brother saw and stripped him of it, tried to rob him of that identity. He's the dreamer. He ends up in Potiphar's house, and he's dressed like probably one of just the household servants, only Potiphar's wife strips him of his cloak. He ends up in prison. What human beings continue to try and take from him, stripping him of his identity, God restores. Every time that human beings tried to derail his story, God used it to advance the dream and his story. Our God specializes in second chances. He specializes in this comeback story. What we see here in Joseph's story is that the pit was the path. The prison was the place of preparation. The betrayal was the bridge. And all of it ends with Joseph in charge, with Joseph in power. Some of you are in the pit right now. For some of us in here, the betrayal is fresh. These moments happened maybe even yesterday. You might be in some type of prison now, and it feels permanent. That not only has man forgotten you, but you feel as if God has forgotten you. And you wonder if he'll ever remember you again, if he'll ever hear your cry, your prayer. The same God that was working in Joseph's life is working in your life. The thing that was meant to destroy you, God may use to advance you. The people who wrote you off, they don't get the last word. The season that feels like a wasteland, nothing is wasted with God. Years passed between Joseph's dream and the palace, years that included pits and prison and waiting, but God was working the whole time. We look at Joseph's story and we remember that everything we are comes from him, from our God. We know who deserves all of the credit for the good things in our life. We prepare faithfully knowing that God may have put us in this season, in this place, for a purpose. And knowing that God has the last word, nobody else. Joseph's brothers looked at the dreamer and they said, "We'll see what becomes of your dreams." Well, now we see where his dream put him. Joseph's dream survived the pit. Joseph's dream survived the slavery, survived false accusation, prison, forgotten. It's because the dream was never Joseph's. The dream was God's. And whatever God has planted in you, whatever he's doing in your life, he won't forget you either. He's at work in your life as well. Many of you are in the middle of a waiting period right now. You feel as if you have been faithful, but it hasn't paid off. You feel as if you have been forgotten. But Joseph's story reminds us to hold on. That God is working even here, even now. Our God was faithful to Joseph in the pit. He was faithful to Joseph in prison. And he's faithful to Joseph in the palace. That same God will be faithful to you too. Faithful to you in this moment. As we close today, our shepherds and their wives will be around the room. And if you feel as if you are in the middle of the pit today, we don't want you to leave this place without stopping and joining one of these servant couples in prayer. Because what we don't want you to ever think is that you are waiting, you are walking this path alone. The promise of the church is that we walk with you through the good times and the hard times. We need one another to remind each other that our God is faithful, that he's with you right in the pit, right in the prison, and right in the palace. If we can help you with anything, won't you come while we stand and sing?